Welcome to the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast, hosted by David Mendel, an attorney, author, and OJM Group partner. We share real-world financial lessons from physicians and insights from experts to impact your bottom line. Check the show notes to get a free copy of our book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Now, over to David.
Hello, folks. Dave Mandel, host of the podcast. Welcome back. Thank you for tuning in, whether you're on one of the audio platforms or watching myself and Dr. K on YouTube and seeing our smiling faces. I appreciate it. So I've got a really interesting guest, and I came to Dr. David Koronkiewicz by speaking. We spoke at the same conference in the business section. It was the AOAO, which is the American Osteopathic or Orthopedic meeting. So all the orthopedic DOs around the country. And I've been fortunate enough to speak there fairly often over the last decade. And he and I spoke in DC just a couple of months ago. And I was really interested in his topics, and we haven't had somebody speak on at least one of the topics. The other kind of peer review we have a couple of years ago. If you're interested in that, go back to, I believe it was season 4, and you'll see another speaker. And we covered that in with Jeff Siegel a little bit in the talk I did with him. So let me tell you just a little bit about Dr. David, and then we'll get into it. So he's a retired orthopedic surgeon, more than 30 years of experience, past chief of staff, so, clinical, but also obviously administrative and managerial roles, and presently of the Indiana Osteopathic Association. And he speaks and is an expert on healthcare quality, safety, and risk management. And so, David, great to have you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, David, for having me. It's a privilege to be there and speak with you in DC. These two topics, as peer review and workplace violence in healthcare, may not sound like financial issues, but in reality, they have some of the most serious professional and economic consequences a physician can face besides a life-altering disability.
Yeah, that's right. And, we've talked about on this podcast, obviously financial is sort of the core, but right outside of that is career, and burnout and satisfaction and having a good career. And these elements, even if they don't even get to a financial place, I think can be a real disruptor and someone having a happy and successful and rewarding career. So that's why I wanted you here to talk about it. So before we get into those more serious topics, let's hear a little bit more about you.
Okay, I grew up in Philadelphia, did my training there. So go Birds, go Eagles.
Yeah. You guys have had a good run. So a lot of good teams coming out of there lately. So yeah.
So my career as a board certified orthopedic, as you said, spanned over 3 decades. First, I was enrolled in the Air Force. I had an Air Force scholarship. So I served my time during Desert Storm. And then I looked at many practices around the country and chose Goshen, Indiana. So for the last 18 years, for 18 years, I was in private practice. And then I joined the hospital system like a lot of people in the country is doing now, for security and other reasons. During that time, I held medical staff positions, all of them basically, in the organization. As you said, I was chief of staff. I was director of quality, led peer review and utilization review committees as well. So I've seen both sides, from administrative as well as a physician side. And I've seen how those processes can be abused as well. So along the way, I earned a master's in healthcare quality and safety management from Jefferson University, and I hold advanced certification in healthcare quality and management with subspecialties as a physician advisor, as well as patient safety and risk management. These roles have shown me how fragile the physician professional standing within the organization or even within their area and can affect their financial future. And when the system goes wrong, it can affect both professionally and, of course, financially.
Yeah. So you really have seen it from all different sides: the practicing physician side, the physician management or executive side, You've gone into it from an academic point of view and gotten a master's. So, I mean, I think your perspective is probably pretty unique, right? Most physicians probably have their perspective, which may be fairly negative and maybe justified. The administrators or physician managers may have a little bit different, but hopefully, as we flesh through this, you can give your input from the different ways you've experienced and studied this over the years. So I appreciate that. Um, so the first talk that you did at the DC meeting was titled, thought it was an interesting title, Peer Review, Friend or Foe. So why did you frame it up that way?
Well, first of all, peer review's been around since the early 1900s, where
Okay.
the the I guess the surgeons basically put it into the medical staff in order for quality. And then in the 1950s, Joint Commission made it part of the accreditation process for hospitals.
Okay.
But at this point, it was supposed to protect the patients uh, by holding physicians accountable, making sure they did quality care, and they weren't just rebels and doing things out of because they want to do it.
Right.
It occasionally is used now to punish physicians and for political or economic reasons. There's multiple examples out there of physicians that are competing that the hospital would decline their privileges because now they're a competitor. And or political reasons. You voice your concerns, or you're very respected in a community, but you don't agree with what administration has to say.
Right.
So when review turns into what we call sham peer review, careers can end overnight. Privileges can be suspended. Your peer review is looked at. You can be reported to the National Practitioners Data Bank. Uh, Insurers are notified. Credentialing is denied, and a ripple effect can destroy decades of your work and the income, even especially in the future.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you can't get a job.
And so the initial sort of the birth, I guess, peer review was to protect patients, to sort of keep the quality of medical treatment at a certain level. But because, sort of, if I'm sort of summarizing, there is not really a check on that the folks running that system in any local environment could use it for in nefarious ways, I guess. Is that
That is
what you're
definitely
saying? That
correct.
like in a certain community, it can be abused essentially.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Joint Commission, has a lot of power. They put in certain guidelines that hospitals are supposed to follow, and some of those are disruptive physician things we'll talk about a little bit later. But being termed disruptive or a problem physician can be devastating for your career. Definitely, if administration wants you out, they'll tend to try and find something that to give you the review that you have, and it could be like a kangaroo court that it's decided before you even have peer review.
Right. Right. So what are, I remember from my notes, there was an act, there was a database, what are sort of set up what a physician should know about just the basics, about the act and what it means in terms of the conditions and things like that.
Okay, the triggered event is usually a peer review. Someone complains to you, or maybe complains to the state society, and there's an investigation. That investigation can suspend your privileges, uh, and all of a sudden your contract is not renewed. And there goes your income, like we talked about. And of course, home life is actually affected too.
Of course.
I've known several physicians that have gotten divorced over, different issues that have happened in the hospital.
Very stressful.
So it's definitely very stressful, and some of them never recover.
Yeah.
I listened to something today where a neurosurgeon in Ohio got suspended from the state because someone put an anonymous, complaint in, and he hasn't practiced in 10 months, and he's in a process of trying to get his license again. And it's a nightmare, financially as well as professionally.
Yeah.
But what we were talking about is every physician should know about this Healthcare Quality Improvement Act of 1986. In the 1980s, there was a lot of lawsuits going on because they thought peer review wasn't fair and things like that. So physicians were not really getting involved in peer review, which is something that's real important that as a medical staff, that is what we do. Medical staff is in charge of peer review. The hospital's in charge of making sure, policies are followed and things like that. But we're in charge of peer review. So what it does is gives qualified immunity to the people reviewing. So as long as it improves quality, it's used. If you use due diligence to get all the facts and not make up facts, or someone's out to get you, but also you have to follow the processes that are in the bylaws. So not only this act in 1986, gave you some immunity, people felt a little bit better about it, but it also created the National Practitioners Data Bank, where you had to report any of these suspensions or malpractice suits or things like that. So it's a double-edged sword there, that you can be suspended and all of a sudden you're reported to the National Data Bank, which could in turn cause you to have difficulty practicing anywhere, because the hospitals as well as uh, healthcare industry is looking at those National Practitioner Data Bank to see if you qualify to be on their portal, on their plan.
So it sounds like the qualified immunity was important because you wanted to get physicians to be willing to be on the committee to review bad actors, right? Because there are some, right? And
Absolutely.
to do that, because physicians probably just by their nature, I don't want to be judging another doc or saying something that's going to affect them negatively, especially when I might have liability for it,
Right.
because there's going to be a lot of gray cases. There's going to be the clear ones that are terrible on that need some sanctions. There's going to be the clear ones where it was abused, and I know Sham, and then there's going to be a lot of edge cases where I can see it this way, I can see it that way, right? So you needed that immunity, it sounds like, to even get the program going back in the 80s in a way that physicians would participate. But it sounds like that might have swung too far, in that now, am I accurate in saying that because of that immunity, that there's not really accountability for bad decisions, and that physicians, who are subject to the peer review don't have as much recourse if they're treated unfairly, and the process is not, with due process and all of that? Is that where we are today to some degree?
I don't think it happens often, but a lot of times it does happen. And you may have people on the review committee that were old partners or competitors, not just the hospital. So the difficulty we have is in a small hospital, you may only have one specialist.
Right.
So how do you get that reviewed? So you have to get an outside organization to do that. But the reality is, you know, you don't want to be reviewed. You want to do a good job, but it doesn't mean that you're still not going to get, peer reviewed. So referencing the second case you were talking about was Patrick versus Burgett.
Yeah, let's talk about that. This is an actual legal case. I was
Right.
gonna bring that up. Patrick v. Burgett. Okay, yeah. And it's an old case. So why is it still important? What's it
Well,
about?
first of all, it was back in 1983
Okay.
when Dr. Patrick, as a vascular surgeon, was working for this Astoria clinic in Oregon, and his time was put in, and they offered him a partnership. Well, he decided to leave the group and open up his own practice. So he's a competitor now, and people in that clinic now said he produced substandard care. So these competitors who are now in on the peer review committee said, "Okay, you're going to lose your privileges because you were substandard caring for patients." Well, it composed of competitors, and they stripped his hospital privileges. So over the next few years, he basically went up the chain through appeals court and everything else. One of the lower courts granted him $2.2 million. But when it went to the Supreme Court eventually, he filed basically on an economic hit job and an elimination of competitiveness. So he was actually basing his defense on the Sherman antitrust law of 1890,
Right.
where the act bans monopolies and unfair restraint of trade. So after 7 years, the Supreme Court said, yes, you should have that judgment, which today is about $7 million. And if you look at some of the uh, payouts now, it may be significantly higher than what it was back then. But they also, what they did was they denied immunity for the hospital and the physicians. So during that time, as people were getting fearful of the peer review process, Congress was working on the Quality Improvement Act that we talked about a few minutes ago. So you still can, there's still a precedent that you can sue uh, if there's sham peer review uh, eh, based on violating antitrust laws. And it exposes the dark side of peer review where competition in politics may masquerade as quality control that the hospital and the committee is saying that you have violated some of these factors. So yes, it's very important. Those two still stand out, and as long as it follows a good process, whether you are the peer reviewer or the peer getting reviewed, you have some immunity to it, and you feel comfortable about having this process done against you. But it's a difficult process because if you're suspended, your name is put in a national data bank and it's difficult to remove it. And when it's difficult to remove it, it's going to sit there for the rest of your career. And whether it be malpractice, sexual assault, whatever is there. And everyone's looking at you when you apply for new credentials at another institution or even an ACT institution. So it can be devastating. And it protects bad actors as well as good ones.
Yeah.
So it's still pertinent today.
It sure is. Yeah. Tell me about the disruptive physician label.
Okay.
If that comes up, what does it mean, and why is it dangerous?
Well, the disruptive physician is sort of goes along with healthcare violence. So
We're
some
going
of
to talk
the
about that in a minute. Yeah.
we'll talk about that in a minute, but healthcare violence basically encompasses a lot of things. So Joint Commission back in 2009, they have sentinel events, which are critical events that people die or injured in the hospital. And it included behaviors that undermine a culture of safety. So when physicians don't answer their pages, or physicians don't call back, or they even went into the extreme of saying if you roll your eyes, if you cross your hands in a defensive position, anything at all can be considered a disruptive physician. So one day you might have joking with the nurse, the next day all of a sudden you're a disruptive physician. So it's very, very difficult to gauge that day. So any unprofessional conduct is considered to be a disruptive physician, or could be considered.
Could be.
So it can go up the chain of command, like we talked about with peer review, but it also is basically, it can be used as a weapon, and administrators have been using them as a weapon. In fact, they've actually had conferences on how to proceed with disruptive physicians. So it's kind of scary that most physicians don't realize these kind of things can happen.
Yeah.
And it's
This might not
purposely.
be, sorry to interrupt, Dave, but so this
That's right.
might not be so much clinical. This may not be a treatment of patients. This could be, peer to peer. This could be
Right.
with employees. This could be more sort of workplace harassment type issues.
Absolutely.
Is that
It could be
something?
screaming at a nurse,
Yeah.
yelling at somebody in the OR, throwing things in the OR. Those are obvious
We
things.
want to,
But
yeah, we want to limit those. So that's probably good. But
a-
like
a-
you said, it can be vague, and it can be broadened to, people develop relationships. They have sense of humors. And then all of a
right.
sudden, the sense of humor I have with one nurse, let's say a new nurse is employed, and she's in the room where I'm making jokes and we're having a great time, me and this one, and she gets offended. And now all of a sudden I'm a disruptive physician, even though, my friend who's the nurse and we've been working together for 20 years would think twice about it. Right.
Exactly. And some of these areas, like you just talked about, the OR, the emergency room, there's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of people
Yes.
that work together in close,
Life or
proximity.
death. I mean,
And
literally.
and really, you know, you have to have some humor. You have to have some of this stuff. And sometimes you blow off steam.
Right.
And it may be appropriate, it may not. But if someone has a bad day and anonymously reports you, then the wheels start turning.
Right.
So the term was is vague on purpose, probably, and it's very subjective. So the administrators can define it as they feel appropriate. Sometimes they do it to silence the physicians who question policies, maybe the cost of something, patient safety issues. I mean, if you're an outspoken person about safety issues, they may not like it, you
Right.
know? So administrators have that ability to uh, create the disruptive physician term. And of course, if it goes through everything, your reputation and income take a hit, as we talked about.
Yep. Yeah. 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 It makes sense. It's certainly something for those who are interested in that topic. Go back to season 5, listen to my conversation with Jeff Siegel, who's, a neurosurgeon, Dave, but also an attorney. So
Yes.
he's somebody who is really, spent his career really helping docs from a legal point of view, and started with malpractice, but started to veer into this area too because it's been so problematic, as you've seen, and what you're talking about, which is, it's just, as a lawyer, it's due process. It's the ability to have some accountability on the decisions. And did they, I mean, even just the idea, like you were saying, hey, if I'm on the committee on peer review, but I used to be your partner, you should be conflicted out.
Right.
Right? I mean, like, like what you do with judges or other in the legal system, right? If you have a pre-existing relationship, especially if it was a negative one, but even positive, because you could then, come to defend somebody when there are some things that should be changed. You shouldn't be on that committee for that one doc. And I don't know
Yeah.
if the rules are that, thought through. I don't. You know,
Yeah, they're out there, but the problem is you might be in a hospital where there's only one specialist.
right?
So there's one ENT doc. So who's going to review your charts?
Right.
You might have an
Role partner.
OBGYN.
Right. That's it.
You
It's
might
like,
have
yeah.
an you might have an OBGYN review your charts, and
Right.
and they don't know what you do,
Right.
or how you do it, or what's right or what's wrong.
Yeah.
So you're relying sometimes on someone that may not be, just like the jury of your peers. If physicians are a defendant, there's not 10 physicians in that jury box. It's just everyday people. And again, things can happen with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but
Well,
again, if you get suspended just because disruptive physician, you could either be sent for remediation that each state usually has something for physicians, but you also lose, your job, and you
right.
report it to the National Practitioner Data Bank, which
Consequences are severe. So
absolutely.
you gotta take this very seriously. So I do wanna be sensitive to time, and I wanna transition to your other topic that you spoke on that I haven't had anybody speak on, now we're in season 6 here, over 100 episodes. So your second lecture was about healthcare violence and bullying. And, you know, um, uh, it was surprising to me because, again, I'm not in the hospital. I'm not in the day to day of medical practice. We help clients on the financial side, but I certainly am quite well aware of burnout, and this might be part of what plays into that, and just the stress of being a physician. So, what's going on there? What's going on in that area in the medical space?
Well, as physicians and advanced practitioners, we see the results of violence every day. We see people that have been pushed down, beat up, accidents or whatever. But more and more, we are becoming the person that is being attacked. You know, uh, COVID accelerated that a little bit. And some of the surveys with nurses, they
Yeah,
basically, show an increase over the last few years of healthcare violence
yeah,
and against patients, against by visitors, and they're just unruly at times.
yeah.
But there's a lot of reasons for that: mental health,
Right.
long wait times in the emergency room. During COVID, you couldn't even see your loved ones in the
Right.
hospital.
Oh, yeah.
So they were very angry with the system.
Sure.
And I think it goes across the board. Like even now, you're reading about unruly passengers on airplanes.
Right. Right.
It's across the board, and we see that people have now lost their humanity per se.
Well,
But what
I think it's also, I mean, again, this is a whole nother topic, but the involvement of insurance and people not being able to afford care that they know their family needs, that makes people angry. And it's not the
Right,
physician's fault or the nurse's fault, but they're the ones they see.
right,
They're not walking into the insurance company's office. Although there was that terrible tragedy of the insurance
absolutely,
executive being killed, right? I mean, that's sort of
right.
the same place.
But we like blaming the insurance company. It's,
We do, and they
yeah,
have a lot. They have a lot of
they
blame.
have a lot to do with it too.
So,
They have a lot to do with it.
yeah,
But the one thing about this violence and intimidation that's going on within the healthcare profession against us, you know, it basically I focused on sexual harassment and bullying,
yeah.
and
You had
it
some
drives
data too in that talk.
right.
So
It
tell us
it
more
dri-
about that.
yeah, it drives burnout, absenteeism, and turnover, which is a
Yeah,
real financial loss for the hospital. So they're not real happy with it itself. Hospitals lose staff. Our malpractice rates climb. Physicians use productivity, like you talked about with burnout. The passion just isn't there. You quiet quit. You do things that because you have to do it, but not that you want to do it.
yeah,
It's a burden to do that. So one of the reasons for a lot of this stuff is when you look at lateral bullying, where you talk about nurse to nurse, physician to physician, or what happens is there's a hierarchy there. You got the attending physician, you got the fellow, the resident, the student, all the
yeah.
way through,
Right.
and there's authority over those people. And the same thing happens with new nurses and experienced nurses. There's a lot of that going on, and it sounds like it's really HR, but it's more than that. It breeds a toxic environment that leads to lawsuits, HR reporting, license complaints that can happen, and you could be destroyed from that. And it's a big economic cost. But more importantly, it diminishes quality and safety within the hospital. And that's an important part of this. And that's where it's all focused, where it's all part of that.
Yeah, and I wrote down a couple as we prep for this, a couple of the stats. You said, American College of Emergency Physicians had a survey where more than 90% of the docs had experienced or witnessed violence. Again, that's in the ER, so obviously that's where it's going to come. Healthcare and social workers 5 times more likely to suffer workplace assaults than other industries. 60,000 nurse assaults a year. Um, there was a meta-analysis that you cited, and 51% of residents experienced some bullying. As you mentioned this, the hierarchy, et cetera, and I'm not the first one to come up with this. And in fact, it's probably pretty mundane, and most people are going to hear this are going to be shaking their heads. But I think there's probably some uh, overlap or corollary to the military, right? I mean, you got people going through like a really tough training regimen, in the military and also in residency fellowship, et cetera. A lot of hours, a lot of stress, life or death, this kind of stuff. And as that happens, you've got sort of the rite of passage in sort of like, well, I went through it, so you have to go through it. That kind of attitude. And if you have that, then you start to let things go that you probably know aren't right, and that gets into what you were saying, which is you peer to peer, right? It's
Correct.
one thing if it's a patient, and that's okay, a different story because you don't even know where they're coming from. They're essentially a stranger to you. They show up, and there's a fear there. But if it's someone that you're dealing with every day, but they're still being like that, well, yeah, hey, I went through it. You can go through it. It's part of the rite of passage, and that's not healthy. Right. I don't think everyone
Right.
would say that's something that we want to limit because like you said, it's affects patient care, it affects burnout and people's satisfaction, and ultimately, it's just a drain on the whole system. So, what are some of the things that you're seeing that you're part of that is going on to address this?
Well, first of all, I would do a couple things or a few things. One, I would understand your bylaws. It's just like a financial contract that you're with your estate planner or your financial advisor. You have to know what's in there and you have to know what the process is for that. So you have to understand your due process. If the due process is not there, then that's a problem. So you want to document everything. When you have the CEO give you a call and says, we need to have a meeting, and you go in there one on one, put your antennas up because that could be a warning. So make sure you document everything. And if there's something that goes a little further, seek counsel. Make sure someone is aware of the familiarity with peer review and hospital law. That's important. And professional liability can cover peer review. You got to make sure that's part of your waiver or addition
That's
to your
really
policy.
important. I want to stop on that for a second.
Okay.
That's related, right? So, well, I want to say two things. One is in your lecture, just going back to the what's going on with healthcare. You mentioned the Save Act, which is
Yeah.
stuff that did that get passed, or where are we with that? Then we'll come back to. I want to come back to
Okay.
the professional liability insurance in a second.
So
Uh,
no, in 2021, it was put in front of Congress, and basically what the SAVE Act is to make it a federal felony to attack a hospital worker or physician, similar to what the airlines workers as well as the crew. If something happens to them, it's a
yeah,
felony and they're arrested. So one of the problems we have is most of these aren't reported. Nurses think it's something we see every day.
right,
This is normal for us. Or it takes a lot of effort to report something,
right,
especially if it's violence. You got to call the police, you got to fill out forms. Now you're taken out of the ER and you're doing all this stuff. And it makes it difficult for the people that are there, let alone you,
right, right.
you know, and it's difficult
That never got
to report.
passed. It's still, obviously
It
there's
it was reinitiated in April 2025. So
okay,
hopefully something more and more representatives are signing on to it.
okay.
Because it's becoming pretty dramatic within our healthcare system.
Right, right. Okay, so I wanted to just okay, so now let's go back, let's physician you were going through some tips for physician self-protection, and you were saying, really getting back also to the Sham peer review, but you said, "Hey, on the medical liability insurance, you may be able to get coverage either through your main policy or maybe there's a rider or something that would maybe cover defense on peer review." Can you speak to that? Because that sounds like lawyer, insurance, wealth manager hat. That's something every doc listening to this should be looking at. Maybe not, they don't elect it every time because the expense and their situation and their practice environment, but it sounds like that would be something I'd be thinking.
Yeah, high risk fields you would think of, neurosurgery, interventional cardiology, uh, orthopedics, and any surgical subspecialty, OBGYN, they're at high risk for having complications, which in turn, you want to protect yourself. So if you're one of those specialists, if you're a dermatologist, eh, you might
Right.
not need it because you're also outpatient only, and there are some peer reviews for outpatient stuff, but mostly it's within a hospital. But if you can get coverage, it's something you might want to look at.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's
At least on the
important.
defense, because that way you feel like, hey, I'm going to go into this if I get, called up, et cetera. And I'm going to be ready. I'm going to be thinking, like you said, you don't just wing it. And
Right.
if you have, you have some coverage for it, you might be more likely to take it more seriously and involve attorneys, et cetera, et cetera. So you
Absolutely.
had a couple others you wanted to mention, and then we can
Okay.
wrap up. Yeah.
So the other thing is, in that little meeting with the CEO, he may say, "Oh, just resign your privileges for that procedure," or we won't report you to the National Practitioner Data Bank. That's completely wrong. Anyone that's suspended or during an investigation with true privileges, they will be reported. So again, know what you're allowed to do and not do. And the other thing is don't resign under duress.
Right.
Again, that attorney is there to help you. Uh, and again, prioritize mental health and personnel safety. So putting things in the hospital like metal detectors and key cards for doors, things like that, the hospital can do. And the other thing is from a Boolean standpoint, lead by example. We as physicians probably have been bullied at some point in our career. In fact, 50 to 70% of female nurses said they've had sexual advances or sexual harassment during their career. So it's prevalent in the female population, but it's also prevalent in surgical subspecialties where it's, tough to get around it. So don't participate in it. Speak up. Improve the culture of your organization. I mean, that's the important thing, is don't be part of it. And reality is, those kids have a phone and are smarter than you. You they can get information much quicker than you can ask a question.
And if you're going off and your temper's bad, you might get captured, and then you're done, right? I mean, that's the world we live in today. So final a thought here. One piece of advice to early career physicians, or if David K could go back 30 years, I was talking to himself. In this area, what's sort of like the one big takeaway?
Well, the one big takeaway is basically never assume the system is going to protect you.
Yeah.
And because you're doing a good job, or you think you're doing well, understand the politics, the laws, and the risks that are involved in being a physician. Understand your bylaws. Be informed. I mean, that's the most important thing. Speak up when you're right, and make sure you document it. Yeah. So again, if you're very boisterous about things, that's something that's very important. And above all, remember, professionalism and self-protection are not opposites. They're partners in career longevity. So if one doesn't fit, you may lose a job, and all of a sudden now you don't have that longevity in your career, and you're sort of in trouble.
Yeah. I mean, it's really about from an external point of view, understand what the environment really is and be smart about it. And internally, professionalism goes along with the practice of medicine, right? And if you have a good idea of what's going on in the environment, and you're smart about the bylaws and what reality is, and you take the professionalism seriously, hopefully you can keep yourself out of all these problems.
Right. You want to be able to read the room.
Right.
That's important. So,
right.
So that's what my advice be.
Yeah. Awesome, David. So thanks so much for being on. Really important topic. I mean, like you said, this is generally wealth and a career podcast, and the topics you talked about are crucial to both of them, because if you get into issues with the peer review, it could be that, like you said, a financially devastating event. And on the workplace violence side, that can lead to burnout, and then you're not feeling good about your career, and your earnings go down, and you're a little bit lost in your career. So that's important too.
No, I agree totally.
So for all the people listening, and some of you watching, thank you for tuning in. If you found this episode and the ones that we do to be of value, feel free to leave us a 5-star review, some positive comments, tell your colleagues about us. And as always, we'll have another episode in another couple weeks.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast is brought to you by OJM Group, a multidisciplinary wealth management firm dedicated to helping physicians build and preserve their wealth while reducing taxes. Episodes from previous seasons are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other popular platforms. Podcast listeners can get a free copy of our book, Wealth Strategies for Today's Physician. Simply text WPPOD to 844-418-1212 to request your free copy. Be sure to join David every 2 weeks for the newest episode of the Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician podcast. This podcast is being provided for informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions expressed on this show by Mr. Mandel and his guests do not constitute legal, tax, or investment advice, or a recommendation of any particular security or strategy, and do not represent the opinions of the underwriters of this programming. Any information prepared from third-party sources is believed to be reliable, though its accuracy is not guaranteed. Opinions expressed in this commentary reflect subjective judgments of the speakers, based on conditions at the time of recording, and are subject to change without notice. Listeners should seek the input of their own financial, tax, and legal professionals before acting on any of the information provided.